country with the police-involved shootings of 2 black men last week, followed by the shootings of 5 Dallas police officers who were attempting to protect a crowd of protesters. So since we all know about some of the other instances of things like this happening last few years, and the protests that have come on about it afterwards, it seems like nothing's really changing. We decided that we had this forum tonight to talk about solutions. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Right next to me, we have Trey Hadrick from Norristown Men of Excellence. Buck Jones, Talbot, he's a community activist here in Norristown. Chief of the Norristown Police Department, Mark Talbot Sr. We have Malik Aziz from the National Exodus Council, which is a prisoner reentry and gang prevention program. We also have Lauren Hughes. She's a Norristown resident, and she is also the NAACP Redress Trail for the greater Norristown area, NAACP. And Councilman Marlon Millner, who was instrumental in putting this together. So we'd like to thank Councilman Millner and also Buck Jones for live streaming this on Facebook. I'd also like to thank John Doyle from Miami Theater for audio and video for this event. So let's get started. I'm going to direct questions to my panelists. We're going to do a couple minutes, maybe a minute or so response, and then after that, we want to kind of toss it around the table and have everybody that wants to comment. The first question we have tonight is a simple one. I think it's at the crux of the situation, and that's what can be done to increase/rebuild trust between the community and the police? And we'll start with each.
Okay, certainly I think that's at the heart of the issue is how do we increase the amount of trust between the police and the community. I think the police have to operate with a sort of mantra that's in our minds all the time of do no harm. One of the things that I talk to the police officers about all the time is when they go to somebody's house or when we're dealing with a situation, one of the things that we need to pay attention to is that things don't get worse because we're there. But I think it's a relatively complex question in terms of building trust. The police department's got to operate in a way in which it's completely focused on its mission. I think a lot of police departments have gotten away from the notion that what we're primarily about is serving and protecting as opposed to enforcing the law. I think we sometimes informally call the police law enforcement officers and look at us as responsible for enforcing the law when the vast majority of what we do has to be about making things go right as opposed to catching people when they do things wrong. I talk to the police officers and I say, imagine what it would be like if the only thing that you did at home was to show up when your kids aren't doing the right thing. So you're never there, but you knock on the door and you walk inside, and if they're doing something wrong, you deal with that and then you leave. Well, your kids are going to hate you. And the community's going to hate you as well. That the community has to see us as a part of the community, and we've got to be there when things haven't gone wrong, and our focus has to be to focus on the health of the community and deal with the problems as they come.
Is there anyone else want to chime in on that one? From the community side, rebuilding trust.
Good evening. One of the things that I always like to talk about is the relationship that the community should have with the police officers in their community. So the big issue with me is transparency and trust with the activists and the community at large when it comes to policing in the neighborhood. There's a lot of sensitive issues in our community. And I was watching the Dallas police chief when he was giving his address the other night on CNN, and he said something about, one thing he said that raised my attention was that sometimes the community is dependent on police too much. And that made sense because, the police are there to what? Protect and serve, right? That's their motto. So the thing about the matter is, when you have that police presence in your community, that doesn't necessarily mean they're the go-to, they're the cure-all for everything. It's the community that has the responsibility to be the cure-all for the community. And the police are only there as a support to help the community when they need it. So I think that's an important part of the dialogue between police and community.
Just really quickly, I believe it's also establishing the rapport that they're on a day-to-day level. I mean, every day I live in Norristown, I live right on our street. I walk out of my door in the morning, and a police officer might be going down the street, and a lot of times I can't even get a good morning. So just even that initial interaction, and then also the trust in the police, I guess, accountability. Not everybody's perfect, not even a police officer. There is police misconduct that goes on, and it needs to be acknowledged. So the community needs to trust that if there is police misconduct, that something's going to be done about it and they're going to be heard about it. So I think that's one of the biggest issues. I was previously in the public defender's office that I would hear and that I would see on a daily basis. Just to trust that something will be done about that police misconduct is big with trust.
Just so I can chime in, I guess really right on what they were all saying. As far as the trust, that's important. The relationships is important. Me personally, I think we have to go up a little further, into the council and the governmental part of the agencies, to where we got to make laws to where the police officers, they need to live in the communities that they police. Otherwise, they're just coming here for a 9-to-5 job, and they don't care nothing about the people that's here. They see us, but they can't relate. There's been a few different situations that I know of this year to where we've tried to engage officers. We had the Father's Day softball game, and we asked them to put together a team, and they didn't do that. Or, even down at the basketball league, don't just come down here, sit in your car and watch what's going on like you're waiting for something to happen. Come down, engage, get out, talk to people, shake some hands, and, you have to form relationships within the community as well, so that when something happens and you come, it's not just about crashing down on people. Now, as far as like Malik said, community has to do some policing too. We also have to hold ourselves accountable as well. So when something does happen, one of the top things you hear is no cooperation. We want the police to have all the answers, but we don't help them get the answers, whether irrelevant of who it is, the old street term, no snitching, or, things like that. We have to get past that if we want a better situation, a better relationship.
Thank you. We've been joined by another panelist here. This is Hakim Jones. He's Councilman before Norristown. Welcome, Hakim. We're going to move on. Some of these questions I put together really fast, and some of them we're going to go through real fast than others because we can almost answer them with the previous question a lot of times. So the second question was, how can a situation like Baton Rouge, Falcon Heights, and ultimately Dallas, even though they're very different, how could they be prevented, especially in places like Norristown? And we'll start off with Councilman.
Good evening. To the question of whether or not these tragedies can be prevented, I think it's like saying, can all crime be prevented, right? And I think crime is possible. It's possible that there can be burglary or assault, and it's certainly possible. The reality is it's possible there can be a police-involved shooting or killing. And it's also possible that when law enforcement is out there doing its job, that description, the explanation, chief notwithstanding, that they're putting their lives at risk. And so they could be injured or killed in the line of duty, working as a police officer. But having said that, I think the question is, we already talked about trust, and I think, I don't want to deal with these flowery words like we have to trust and we have to build relationships. I think number one, we have to have a policing strategy that both the police department and neighborhoods believe is a jointly produced strategy, right? And so there's some ideas in policing, and I can say here, number one, I think people have to have respect for police, and police have to have respect for leaders and people in the community when they come to the table to talk about what are the policing priorities. And so I start by saying I have a lot of respect for Chief Talbot. So that actually, and he has respect for me, so that allows us to have forthright conversations. We don't have to tiptoe around each other. We don't have to engage in certain rituals or formalities to make sure we respect one another, because that mutual respect is there. And so I think what has come out of that is when you go into any given neighborhood in this town, have there been discussions that relate to priorities? I mean, for example, a few years ago, when I and other clergy in this town, in my other role as a minister, pastor, started to walk the streets late at night, there are people who are out, right? We weren't making a moral judgment about whether they should or should not be out, including young people who are out past curfew. And we asked them, what could we do to reduce the violence? And they started to say things that were important to them about what would make the community safer. Things that didn't always involve having a confrontation with a police officer, right? Often the confrontations with the police officers late at night were things that they thought caused tension rather than produced more safety. Or the idea, for example, I was on Lafayette Street once, and we saw, and this was before, many years before Chief Talbot was here, and the guys in the patrol car circled the block like 5 times. And the people on the porch were really irritated, the porch we were at were really irritated, because it was like, obviously they're kind of looking out for them. They have this sense that there might be some nefarious activity going on. So the next time they circled the block, I and some of the other ministers went to the curb and kind of flagged them. We then reached our hands out, introduced ourselves, explained why we were out on the street and why we were talking to the people at this particular household. It obviously diffused the situation because they didn't circle the block again, right? And so that way of building trust. When I was out there on the streets late at night, the department used to have people at the Quick 7 supermarket. It's on Marshall Street, but it's behind other storefronts. They often would have a car there because there was a shift change at midnight. We would always start by going to introduce ourselves to those officers so they would know there's a group that's concerned and not getting into bad activity that's going to be walking these streets, say, between midnight and 2 in the morning. So I think building a strategy where people have all agreed these are the priorities we want tackled in this neighborhood helps create the trust when an incident may occur as you go about doing the strategy that the community has agreed upon.
Good evening. So, Oscar, you brought the question about how do we prevent things from happening as happened in Dallas as well as Minnesota. I would just say, these tragedies seem to come out of levels of people being uncomfortable around each other, whether they're different in race or in their social status. I think our police officers and law enforcement, there is a cultural gap, in the communities. I do think our hiring, could be improved as far as putting, people in communities that would, work well in those communities. So sometimes the uncomfortable nature that these two entities have when they clash, it creates chaos. So we either need to train our officers, to be a little bit more sensitive and understanding of each other, as well as training some of our young people in the neighborhoods about body language, about gestures, about where they put their hands and things like that. But overall, there's a huge gap in our communities, not just in Norristown, but nationwide. Our police departments should go after minority officers in large minority populations.
If I may, real quick. Also, just to chime in, like Hakim said, he touched on it, training is one of the most important things. So we definitely need proper training to avoid these things that's happening. that's going on. But as far as dealing with here in Norristown, we have our police department, the sheriff, the county sheriffs, and the probation officers. Because we have people here in Norristown on probation, but I think our police department themselves take a lot of the blame for some of these other things that are going on. Now, I don't know how Chief in itself can rein it in, like, this is my town, you guys check in with me, but I know that probation officers, when they're coming in, whether they're working with police or not, they come through and do some unhumanly acts to people. To some people that are on probation, disrespectful acts. I had a lady tell me how she was taken from her home because she called in to witness something. They took her from her home without even letting her get dressed. Wouldn't let her son upstairs, let her know that she was leaving. She told me she would never call in to witness nothing again. And we wonder why we can't get help, because these are disrespectful things that are taking place. The probation officer, some of the things they do. I had a young guy tell me how a probation officer stripped him down to his underwear on the streets. Disrespectful. Now, how do we, hone in these things? Okay, now Chief Talbot came in and he's forming a bridge. But what about these other law enforcement? Because when these other players come into play here in Norristown, all it comes down to is police. It's not broken into sheriff, probation, or whatever. So who's responsible for all of these entities?
I'd like to say that, one of the big mistakes I think a lot of people make on both sides of the divide is we deny the humanity of the other. That we pretend like we know, you think you know a police officer because you see them in uniform. All right? You think that I walk in a room and because I wear a badge and a gun, you know who I am, and that's not the case. Or it might be the case, but it's not because of the uniform that I wear. And the police are guilty of that as well, looking at members of the community and thinking that they know who they're dealing with because they fit a certain prototype of maybe what they feel like is dangerous or represent danger. I think that the more that we mutually focus on how much alike we are, the better off we are. I promise you, if you think that you could put yourself on a corner at 2 o'clock in the morning where 3 or 4 people that you don't know are hanging out, and the mandate is to keep that neighborhood safe, and you have a gun and you have a badge, and you think that people are going to cooperate with you, but you're not sure, and you're focused on getting home at the end of your tour of duty, I promise you some of the decisions that you've seen that you're unhappy with, you're going to make the same decisions yourself. I think that we deny the level of similarity that we have when we respond to the context in which we're raised or we find ourselves in. I think that those of us who achieved any degree of success in our lives look at others that haven't achieved that success and say, you can lift yourself up by your bootstraps. When in fact, we all pretty much respond almost exactly the same way given the circumstances that we're provided. So I think that the conversation really needs to recognize that human beings are very much alike. And what we're talking about are larger systems and structures that force behaviors in a certain direction and do so relentlessly and consistently and really extend beyond an individual bias or predilection or a preference for doing something a certain way. That, morality in terms of how a police officer does his job is most often something that's not in question. They want to do the right thing. And if you look at how the police behave across the world, you'll see a relatively similar culture. The difference very often, or the difference that I think you see here is the larger culture that is the United States of America. And what that does to influence everybody's perception of what constitutes danger, what justifies an arrest, when should we intervene, what kind of language should we use when we intervene. All these things fall outside the boundaries of the police department and ultimately impact what happens in very real ways. And I think we need to look at that.
One thing about community policing is that community policing is like anything else, leadership. It's a mindset from the top down. So when the leadership is focused on the community policing, the activities and principles of how the leadership wants the community policing to work, then it comes down to the community. Because that's one of the things that when I was working in the mayor's office, the affiliate job that Commissioner Sylvester Johnson used to always say. He used to always say it's a mindset and that you cannot arrest your way out of a problem, out of any crime, anything. You're never going to arrest your way out. There has to be a change in the community setting for police and the community to work. So there's a whole lot of things that needs to be done, right? And I agree with Buck. You need, when you have that assortment of law enforcement working in the city, like probation and parole, state police, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, any law enforcement, you have to have a mandate that you have to be sensitive to the needs of the community and to add to the community. Because, people real for real, a lot of them can just sit in the police station all day. They can just sit in the police station all day and do not even come out in the community. But that's not what we want. We want them to be in the community because we know we need them in the community. But we want them to be better prepared for working in the community with us.
I think it's important to say here for me to put a little more ink on the point that I was trying to make earlier. And with all due respect, Chief, I think it's important that we don't believe that, and what I am saying is that police are not neutral actors in a socio-political environment that's tilted against African Americans, such that they can simply say, we are carrying out our duties or we are conducting policing. We can conduct policing either in a way that reinforces discrimination or counters it. And by that I mean I want to be more precise. I want people to understand what I'm saying. So we've heard language over the years of things like police brutality, right? Everybody's heard that phrase. We've heard phrases like racial profiling. Those are negative ways to describe, and I'm not saying Chief Talbot is doing this, but those are negative ways to describe what some police have said is policing, right? The Department of Justice just went down in Philly and told them to end, stop, and frisk, and they said, we're going to end, stop, and frisk, asterisk, but we're going to have this, if it falls within this criteria here, we might still stop and frisk. And so the reason I'm drawing our attention to, technical terms as it relates to what does it mean to police in a community, because there is now data. There's data that shows that if there is a mere encounter between law enforcement and you're under the age of 18 in Norristown, even though black youth in town might only be 1/3 of the population, they're 80% of the juvenile arrests, right? That's disproportionate. More of them are getting arrested than the relationship to the overall population of young people. And I'm saying simply that has to go down. Now, there are various ways we can address that going down. But I think we as a community have to decide that that is not acceptable. Likewise, before Chief Talbot's time, I know there was a lot of debate in this community about curfew during the summer. We're in the summer now. Well, the police department strategy used to be to round up kids or to cite their parents, right? Created this cycle of debt because you get this citation, you can't afford to pay it. You go to court, a judgment is going to be put out against you. You're going to get a bench warrant for a citation you couldn't pay for your kid being out at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they're supposed to be in at midnight, and it's a cycle, right? And if Hispanics are disproportionately impacted by that, well, that's going to create an environment where they're going to not want to deal with law enforcement because they feel like they're always getting these citations that they cannot afford to pay. So we have to make a decision that no, we don't want police merely writing citations to poor people, black and brown people that can't afford to pay. And we don't want them arresting kids merely for being out after curfew, because if we do what we ought to do as a community, now it's not all on police. When we were out there on the streets, it was community groups and churches that were charged with, well, we've got to create alternatives. We've got to create alternative spaces. We've got to acknowledge that a 16-year-old may not want to be in the house at 11 o'clock at night. So can we create these safe spaces for them to be? And at the same time say, we don't want incidents on the corner to escalate either into a citation of the parent or guardian or the arrest of the juvenile. And I think in those ways, we begin to literally change the way the policing happens in the community. Because what I want them going after at 2 o'clock at night is the guy with a gun, not the kid hanging out on the corner hitting a stop sign because they're being playful. They're being a teenager, right? Right? I didn't say it wasn't against the law, but if you want, do you want 2 squad cars there breaking up 4 kids at the corner because they're hitting a stop sign, or do you want them catching the guy with the gun? And I think we have to make those decisions by what we challenge our department to do.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say we don't have any substantive disagreement on that. But you're also talking conceptually versus what's happening here in Norristown. That I've been police chief since November of 2013. Arrests are down substantially. Crime is down substantially. I think that the notion that we need more minorities who are interested in policing, the implication there is policing is never going to be attractive to minorities until the police are attractive to minorities. I think that point is always going to hold true, but I think it's a problem if we're looking at what is the national trend versus what happens here. In fact, in terms of the disparate impact that you're referring to, that's not the case in Norristown. And that the numbers of people that we're arresting has gone down dramatically because we have much more time to do the work that we do because we're not giving out tickets for curfew violations, right? And the only time we're going to give out a ticket for curfew violation is if we're saving some kid's life, right? Because, don't kid yourself. There are some deep and fundamental problems in policing. I know how to do this job as well as anybody does. The way that we police Norristown is the way that policing should work, but also in terms of keeping kids safe. If your kid is hanging out at 2 o'clock in the morning, trust me that there are certain parts of Norristown where you don't want that kid to be. You don't want them there. You want us to bring your child home safely. And so we're going to do that by the lawful means that we have at our disposal. But I think it's important to say, what you're looking for on a conceptual level is what we're looking for as well. And it's what we operationalize in Norristown. And I think just like I told the cops when we had this tragedy last week, don't be mad at somebody else's issue. Don't be mad at what happened in Dallas when people here are treating us well. They really are. The relationships that I've had in Norristown are unbelievably and relentlessly positive. The positive feedback has been, is it 100% good? No, because at its very heart, policing is not pretty. Right? At the end of the day, we're going to have to make some tough decisions, and you want us to make those tough decisions. We can't shrink away from the tough stuff, but we also can't use that as a shield and say, don't challenge anything we do. I'm not saying that either. But we've got to operationalize the version of policing that's important to Norristown, right? Not what just I think is a good idea. And I think that we've all got to be willing to have these difficult conversations, but then also to finish it with, at the end of the day, what's happening here? Is it the right thing? Or is there a narrative that's been created in this community that's different than what I'm describing right now? I don't think it is. I really don't.
And I was going to say too, just jumping in with you, Chief and Marlon. First of all, Marlon, you're right. Chief, you're right. And we got to understand too, sometimes these kids not just running around jumping up slapping stop signs. These kids is bad sometimes. So let's not get it, mixed up. So we had a situation where we had like 50 kids, a big fight last week at the basketball game. They pull out weapons. And what happens is police are not always there. So the point I wanted to bring, just like the chief said, what's happening around the country, and that was an important reason for me to reach out to chief and the people that are here. We've all talked. To have this discussion here in Norristown because these things don't happen in Norristown. We have things that happen here, but what happened there, that's not an important thing. But we do want to address what we do have. And we also want to give credit to those, crime is down, you came chief, you made some relationship. But a lot of other things happened in the past few years. Men of Norristown have stepped up in the past few years. I know a few years ago, and I'm going to point to the back, the cameras can't see it, but I see some brothers in the back of this room that a few years ago wouldn't have came to this meeting. The important thing is now that they're here, and they're out in the streets, they're not going to get the credit, and they're not going to be given credit for what they do. We have brothers that, may have one side been on the other side of the tracks. These brothers may be on probation or parole, so they can't get credit. But these brothers started to work, they started a business. And what they do now is go around with their landscaping business and they pick up some of these bad kids off the street that are doing things, maybe selling drugs or whatever they may be doing on the streets. And they grab these kids and say, hey, come on, let me show you a better way. And that's the way it's going to work. We have mentors and coaches that never get the credit that they should. And these bridges, like I told the chief, when the chief came and before the chief came, okay, for Willie, I wanted Willie. Why was I so much for Willie? Why do I think Norristown was so much for Willie? Because we thought he could bridge the gap that we needed. When the chief came, he did just that. He went around and did local meetings and everything. I've been to a lot of those meetings, and like I told the chief today, what he did was he built the bridge for community and cops relationships. Now it's up to us to come and meet him on that bridge. Period. I mean, he can't do it by himself and we can't do it by ourselves. We have to work together. But if we got a thing like this is broken. Y'all might not see it. I know all the seats aren't filled, and you might not be seeing everybody's in here. The most proud group that I am of that's here is in the back 3 rows. I can tell you that. These back 3 rows are filled with convicts, ex-cons, and people on probation. But they're here and they're making a difference.
Okay, we covered a lot with that one. I'm going to shuffle the deck a little bit because some of these questions are being answered as we're going along, which is, I think, the goal of this conversation. I'm going to direct my next question to Trey Hadrick because I know you've been involved with youth in the community. And when young people in particular see incidents like what happened in the last few weeks, and we already talked about some of the tensions they're having with police, different ways we go about their curfews, and just discipline and overall interaction with the community as far as young people go. Like, you got your finger on the pulse of that. What are they thinking, what are they feeling, and how can we get them involved in the conversation? Because of course they're going to be the next people that have to deal with these issues.
Just some small ideas I think a lot of people touched on as far as exposure, as far as diversifying our police force, to build rapport, transparency, that Brother Aziz spoke about. I think that's one of the things that we can help with that. Often our children don't see police who look like that, whether it is a fact or not. That's the reality, and they don't really have that rapport. They don't speak the same language. That also builds a gap. So there's different ways I think that we can build with the kids to enable them to feel more comfortable, feel more open to want to speak with police, to understand them in different ways. They do witness a lot of things in the streets. I know we say Norristown is different, but there are certain things that are still going on. We have to be honest with you. It might be better, but there's still issues that need to be, addressed. Kids come to different venues where I'm at. I speak to them. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. So I think, the reality is, yes, there's changes that have been going on here, but progress still needs to be made. I know Chief spoke earlier about You know, he doesn't want his police to be upset regarding things that happen somewhere else or doing something good. But on the flip side, you have people who are seeing things happen other places and still feel attached to that. You know, it's hard for me not to say I see something happen in Minnesota as African American male and not say, wow, that hurts. That's not right. I can't just say, well, it's not happening to me in Norristown. I'd be lying to everybody if I said it. You know, so I think that's just not reality. We have to make sure that we're being honest up front with certain things. And I definitely know the police, department's probably doing a lot better job statistically and everything, but at the same time, there are challenges that we still need to overcome. You know, more diversified staff. You know, I don't know what the laws are to make that really happen. You know, but we got to make sure that everybody has a fair opportunity. But we need more African Americans, Latinos on our police force. Period. You know, even historical ways. If you think about, there's some people who have police officers in their family for years. My father, my grandfather, in our communities, not often do you see that in Black and Latino communities. You know, I don't know anybody in my own family, maybe one person was a police chief, but I can tell you a lot more athletes and different things. So we have to find ways to bridge that gap, to make kids want to be part of that and understand that you're not just going out to do the wrong things, but to protect and serve the good of the community. So, just a thought.
Anybody else with these questions?
Let me just add, I think it's important to say that, and I fully understand how the narrative or the story that you see on YouTube varies in Norristown, Pennsylvania, that it's extremely easy to internalize a situation like that because you feel like it creates something that's possible in your life. Speaking directly to those kids, what you're seeing, frankly, is the worst of policing. You're not seeing the culture of policing. You're seeing a subculture, right? Just like you can't generalize the man in Dallas who killed 5 police officers as representative of the African American community. Certainly not. Well, the YouTube videos are certainly not representative of the iteration of policing that anybody thinks, or anybody with any sense thinks is a good idea. That at its very core, policing is an honorable profession, and I've been willing to give my life for over 20 years for the communities that I've worked in. And that's true for 99% of the police officers I've worked with. And you've got to recognize that there are 18,000 police departments in this country. The fact that we've seen the same YouTube video 100 times on TV doesn't mean that there are problems in 18,000 police departments, right? Obviously, there is progress to make. I feel extremely committed to making sure that it doesn't happen here. But then also, I think you got to recognize that as I'm walking around, there are times I'm not wearing this police uniform. I have grown black males that call me dad that are out living their lives. I don't want to see that happen to them either. We've got to continue to work together to make sure it doesn't happen. And the last thing I think is important is that we don't turn our backs on each other. If you turn your back on, here in Norristown, on the Norristown Police Department, you got nothing. If we turn our backs on you, we got nothing. We've got to be willing to work through these issues with each other. We've got to be willing to overcome these problems and develop a better way of interacting.
I would just like to point out some of the positive things that are happening between the community and the police that I'm aware of. Crime has been going down and arrests have been going down. There's been a sense of diverting things throughout our community and our county. The goal isn't to arrest kids and slap felonies on them. I've seen some effort with the police department, working in the mental health community. There's something called a community hub meeting. That's anyone from the police department, children and youth, children's mobile crisis, the women's center, the victim center, the school district. So there are meetings like that take place regularly. With full disclosure, the police are trying to reach out to these agencies when they come across some of their most serious cases. And I've had the ability to see chances where police want to prevent things before they happen. So, you know, I do see the block parties, 10 out the block of Willow Street. I do see, you know, the cops in the coffee, you know, conversations. There's an effort that's going on, you know, and I think that's the right direction. I don't see it happening in other places, and we're the type of community that you know, we can continue. You know, we've had youth police forums in the past. You know, we filled up auditoriums and let police sit and work together. At the county level, there have been DMC, disproportionate minority contact forums, where the police have been going to schools with different townships. So I do think there's efforts being made. I think we need to draw the line and make sure they're authentic. You know, make sure they're authentic. Make sure it's not about, you know, what the paper's going to say, what you know, it's going to look like on the outside. But I do think our department recognizes we have a serious mental health problem here in the community as well, and they try to get resources for some of their most dangerous victims, and I've seen that personally.
Sorry.
You know, another thing, right? You got to have racial harmony on a department. And one of the things, can you hear me? Can't hear me. All right. One of the things about a community sending, one thing about community sending mixed messages to out in the community. Just for example, tonight, right down the Ridge, there's a rally for the 5th Police District in Philadelphia. Flyers was put out in the Roxborough, Manayunk area saying, white people support your police department. So these are the things, right, that when people get these things, the media, whoever get these things, that a lot of times people get the idea that there is a division between the police and the black community. That there's a serious division between the black, because sometimes other races make that the scenario, right? I mean, and a lot of times, that's where I'm from. I'm from down in Roxborough, man. Grew up there, 5th generation. And the thing of the matter is, we always had problems as children growing up with the police department from the 5th district. Right? And then in that year, in the 70s, we wearing afros this big and stuff like that, and that was a problem to them because they thought that symbolized black power because we had afros, and black power is different than black pride, from black pride and being proud of who you are. It's a difference, right? So the thing of the matter is, those sensitivities need to be met. And anybody that's in law enforcement and anybody in the community, they need to be met, because that way, if you do have that harmony and people understand everybody's culture, and then they'll understand that everybody's the same, just maybe look a shade different something, then we can have more workable solutions with the police in our community.
Councilman.
This comment really is just to ask Chief Talbot to say a bit more about the impact of the larger culture. I recall that even former Republican presidential candidate Marco Rubio once said one of his favorite albums was NWA, Straight Outta Compton, right? And since I will never run for public office again, I can acknowledge that is, I believe, one of the best rap albums ever. And as we know, some very in-your-face statements are made about the police, right? So here I was, the son of 2 school teachers and a Pentecostal pastor who definitely did not spare the rod, being deeply influenced by a world that I had no idea about. Even though our church was across the street from a crack house, one of the church mothers' grandson got shot and killed there. Our church was surrounded by 3 housing projects. I didn't really know anything about LA, right, and South Central. I didn't know anything about that culture. And so, I mean, it's stunning, the Alton Stone video. It's stunning because it's not Nintendo, it's not Wii, it's like, this is real. This guy was shot seen all over the world moments after it occurred. And so I don't know that if I were a teenager in Norristown, I don't even think it would be my consideration. I mean, so my question is, in light of that, in light of the larger culture, what do you think the department ought to be doing to offer something, some other message or signal? Because I will tell you, if I was a kid on Facebook last week, the thing I was thinking about most was that and not the last interaction I had with a police officer in Norristown.
So, you know, I think that the responsibility of the police is to create experiences in the community that refute the notion that the police are dangerous and something to be feared. That we've got to recognize the impact of social media, we've got to recognize the connections that we have with each other that extend the narrative of Alton Sterling throughout the country. And embrace the fact, although, you know, I encourage everybody to pay attention to what's happening right here in Norristown, Pennsylvania, I fully recognize the impact of our digital environment. That as soon as something happens halfway across the country, we feel it here in Norristown, Pennsylvania. We've got the police, our mandate is, you know, one of the things I say to the cops all the time, if they were sitting here right now, they'd roll their eyes. I say, we treat people better than they expect to be treated. That our mission is to go out in the community and interact with other human beings in a way that makes their life better. And we have a relentlessly positive message that we can bring whenever possible to the community. You know, is there any way to erase that from people's minds? Probably not. I think the reality of you know, embracing the environment that we have chosen as police officers and rising up to the challenge and ensuring that we do whatever we have to do every single day. And I mean, you know, in terms of the larger culture, right? Where do police officers come from? We don't make them in the police department, right? I am yet to make a police officer. They come to the police officer from the community. They, believe it or not, they come with some ideas that I don't appreciate. There's bias that comes in the door, and we're stuck dealing with it like anybody else. Right? I think that we minimize, my only point there is we minimize the impact of a culture in the United States of America that clearly every single, right, let me go ahead and make this point that's right in there in everybody's face. Every single objective measure and study that's out there that looks at the impact of the criminal justice system as it relates to race shows that black and brown people get hit harder than anybody else. Right? That's the reality. I am yet to write a law. I've never done that. I'm yet to meet the police officer who's written a law. A lot of these things are the environment in which we work. We are, I think, appropriately focusing on the police because we can be life-threatening in some very vicious and unjustifiable ways. You know, that's not the norm by any stretch of the imagination, but it can happen. But I think the lens needs to be much broader and look at the rest of the criminal justice system. You know, why is it that we've had 44 presidents, right? We've had 44 presidents and we have one that doesn't fit the demographic of the rest. Why is it that nearly every single governor, right, every school principal, almost every superintendent, right, you name the positions of power, what do they look like? Is it an accident? You know, let's tell the real story. Is it an accident? Okay, well, it's the same issue that plays out on the street corner. Those things are not disconnected by any stretch of the imagination, is what I'm saying. That if we want to focus on the police because we do an extremely dangerous job and it's what's in the news right now, okay, that's fair. But let's have the rest of the conversation. You know, let's talk about the rest of the issue and ask harder questions about the aspirational foundations of the United States of America. Are we living up to it? You know, does it seem like all men are created equal? Or is that an aspiration that has yet to be met? Now, I'm not going to answer that question, but it feels really obvious.
But let me say this. If you take
police officer works on the street serious, the department, then they should make sure when they come out of the police academy that they had the necessary training around sensitivity issues and about cultural issues, right? That's one of the things that Commissioner Johnson, when we worked together, I spoke to a graduating police academy class every month about the culture of the streets, about the sensitivity issues in the streets. And there has to be a better way to find out the biases of anybody in the police department before they hit the street. It's critical that we know who they are before they hit the street, especially if they have a bias. If they're working in a predominantly black and Latino community, and they have a bias toward blacks and Latinos, it's just a matter of time before something happens. So that's important, that training and sensitivity happens. And you know what else, Chief? There's more and more African American and Latino police chiefs in the country, in major cities, representing major cities. It's the department below them. I mean, I'm telling you, real rap, I've seen this. I've seen how people was undermined because of that racial component right there. The chief is black, all the deputies is white. And they resent the chief that he's black because, of course, he's going to be sensitive toward what? His community. So, hey, it is what it is.
If I can chime in real quick on this too. One of the things I think is it comes down to what irrelevant, not irrelevant, but let's just say, no matter what happens, the reason it happens, it goes down. Alton Sterling happens here in Norristown. Now what happens to those police officers is what the problem is. The police officers in these cases haven't been dealt with. They get put on leave with pay. When they do get their day in court, check the history of the ones that have happened, they get found not guilty. This is the problem that the communities are having because we're not getting equal justice. We get accused of something, we're in jail. I know the law says innocent until proven guilty, but if you don't got that bail money, you're in jail. These police officers aren't sitting in jail while they investigate. These police officers are at home, having dinner, going to baseball games, because they're still getting paid. And then they wind up getting innocent anyway. So the reason that the anger, the irritation, the frustration is building, because time and time again, just like if you have a brother and sister, your sister keep telling her brother you never get in trouble, she gonna get mad. Then one day she gonna bust him upside his head. And that's what happened. Eventually, the frustrations are going to build. Quit beating around the bush. People get on the page and media and everything, and you say, oh, that's not the way to handle it. No, it's not the way to handle it, but what else do you expect people to do when they don't have no comeback? And that's what we got to do.
Can I say something? Are we
I just want to, I'm sorry, in fact, after this question was over, I was going to let everybody know that they can ask questions. We have questions provided that we will talk about right after the discussion. So if we could do that, we could get that set up so that audience members can.
I know they're pushing Chief here a little hard, so let me defend him a little bit and express some of my frustration. Part of what he's talking about, to change laws and to change the political power structure that creates the environment in which policing is done, takes risk, takes political risk, and it takes, frankly, support when people take those risks. I feel like I have some understanding of public policy as it relates to criminal justice reform. And when nobody that I was aware of in Norristown could have an articulate conversation before Ms. Keir Gray, who's now gone on to head the Public Defenders Association in Philadelphia, before we had a real advocate within the county, when there were people who not only did not look like us, but did not agree with us, I was up there trying to articulate for a certain public policy that would make a difference on the ground with how do you go to youth detention center or do you get diversion, right? Do you get probation or do you go, to state penitentiary? So there were these fights that have to be fought, but it's hard to fight them when the citizens don't have your back, right? Because everybody's got to elected, there are term limits. There's a process here we call politics. And so part of what we're going to have to change, I would still continue to push, Chief, that, look, if you're policing under, and we know it's not, but when you were policing under Jim Crow segregation, it was the law to tell people they were less than. You cannot drink from that water fountain. And we have to be aware. I don't even think sensitive is a good word. We have to be aware of the ways in which the ways we enforce the law. There are young people on our streets believe that enforcement is a way of telling them they are less than. And we got to figure out another way. And if that way is that through legislation at a state and federal level, we have to have laws changed. For example, if you're going to get probation for powder cocaine, why are you going for 5 to 10 mandatory minimum for crack? I mean, then the citizens have to extend the political will to lead to elected officials who will cast a vote that will change the law in that direction. Because no, I don't blame the police officer if the law is to arrest a guy for crack, and I don't blame the DA and the judge if it's a mandatory minimum. I mean, that has to be changed if we want them to do something differently. And so my frustration is, and I've been at work in this county, let me say this about the minority officers. Malik, Brother Malik, I appreciate you, but Montgomery County is different than Philadelphia. There are multiple police departments in this county. The police academy is run through the community college. Norristown doesn't run its own academy. So if other departments aren't as progressive as our department, we're stuck with a training mechanism and a training system that won't achieve. So we need a county-wide effort of leaders and of citizens in multiple boroughs and townships that will demand, for example, whether Act 120 is required or not. We know disproportionately, the truth is black and brown folks may not come to that process with the kind of financial resources that already have the Act 120. They don't know if they're ultimately going to make the force. And so do I want to spend $4,000 or $5,000 on my Act 120 and then I don't even make the force? So these are some of we got to have some information and we got to change some laws and some rules about how things get done. And when you do that, you get talked about, you get maligned, you get pushback, particularly from the folk that don't want to do it. And if you look behind you and there's nobody behind you, it's hard to keep pushing the folk that got a united front and there's nobody that has your back. So we got to pay attention to who we're putting in these county positions, in these township positions, and in Norristown positions if you want them to advocate for the kind of rules that are going to lead to a more diverse force, that are going to lead to kids not going to jail on certain offenses, but getting diverted to programs for restorative justice practices. It takes citizen will that's reflected in who we put in power.
Okay, so it's a lot to digest. We're getting there, and we're talking about solutions, which is great. How these things can be implemented is round two. I'm going to take a break, not a break from the panel, but I just want to make sure that everyone that has a response card that wants to ask a question can do that. Are they on the podium? Okay, yeah, we have a pencil and or pen and paper on the podium for anybody that would like to pose a question.
So people are asked to take a pen or the note cards that are there, write down your question. You can give them to the moderator.
I think my question is
We'll give you a chance for clarification. Okay.
Just to repeat, any questions? Anybody want to ask any questions? And listen what I'll say. Check this out. Good. Let's do this. But this ain't this is our meeting, right? Right. This is our meeting. So, and I hate to take this over from y'all, sir, because I don't want people to leave.
Done.
So let's do this. Let's come back. We got to keep organized, and let's respect the moderator with your questions. But let's go ahead and ask your questions at your seat. Fair enough? Yeah. All right, let's do that. Kid, come back. Everybody come back. I don't want y'all leaving. But let's do that. But we still got to show respect to the moderator. Fair enough? All right.
Well, what we'll do, see, well, like I said, we can take some questions now.